At 28 years old, I was shot and paralyzed from the chest down. I had two options. I could stop and let the things I cannot control me, or I could move forward and put my energy into things that would improve my life and those around me. I chose to move forward and surround myself with risk takers, innovators, and leaders who've chosen the same path. Join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Forward with me, Herrera, and my guest today, Dave Alberga. Dave is a very successful entrepreneur. He's a military veteran, and we talked about some truly incredible experiences that he's had. He literally went from selling maxi pads out of the trunk of his car as a product manager for a company to leading an organization, a startup called Active.com, which he took over the course of almost 13 years from $75,000 in revenue to almost $500 million, almost $500 million in annual revenue before he left and turned over as the CEO of that corporation. We talked about the stress and rigor that running a company like Active took on him physically, mentally, emotionally, and how he had to take a year off after that event to decompress. Talked about what drives him and inspires him to action of helping others and building things and solving problems, and how he now gives back as an advisor, investor, and board member for a variety of nonprofits and startups in the fitness space for companies like Peloton, which he was an investor in, nonprofits like the Honor Foundation, which he's a board member of, and he has a truly amazing story of resilience and leadership, and someone that I'm honored to call a friend. I truly enjoyed this conversation I had with Dave, and I hope you do as well. If you do and feel so inclined, please consider leaving us a 5-star review if you're on Apple Podcasts, or listening or sharing this episode if it's on Spotify or any of the other platforms we're on. These ratings and reviews are critical to helping us reach more people that may not already be part of the movement that we're creating around resilience, adaptability, and moving forward past challenge, trauma, and adversity. And so I am honored to have shared this episode with you of Forward with Dave Alberga. He's a West Point grad, but I won't hold that against him. And I truly hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Nice to be here.
Pleasure's all mine. So great to catch up with you. To start, love to get the Army thing out of the way, since you went to that school on that river there in New York.
Yeah.
Our rivals, it's Naval Academy grad. So
Hudson High.
Yeah.
It's funny.
How'd you end up there?
A little bit by happenstance, I think. A couple of things. Probably the biggest drivers were was ready for a real challenge, and just I had kind of gone through high school, kind of doing a bit of the minimum and doing great, just with the ability to do the minimum and do great is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, right? And so I was ready for something more difficult. I think I was also ready to be financially independent from my parents. And so the academy offered the ability to not have to send report cards home, and and to be completely independent from the time from the moment I showed up there on, I guess it was I'm going to age myself here. I think it was July 1st, 1980. And so I've been financially independent since I was 17, which was I think a really great opportunity, gave me a lot of freedom. So
it's awesome. Yeah. I feel like I can kind of relate to that as well. And it's definitely one of the things the academies can provide, right? You don't just go there for an education, but it's a profession, right? And you make a modest, very, very modest paycheck, but school's free, food's free, everything else, all that stuff's free.
The money was always fine for me. I never felt wanting. And I was always had been instilled with this sense of service, or somehow I grew up with a sense of service. And for me, it kind of checked that box in a big way. And so I wanted to do something that felt meaningful, and it fulfilled that for me. It wasn't easy, right? Like, it's um, if you want a really tough 4 years of military academy, right, you go to West Point, right? If you want something a little bit less military, you go to Annapolis, right? But if you want something not military at all, right, there are obviously a lot of choices out there. Like you can go to the Air Force Academy or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My dad went to the Air Force Academy, so yeah.
Yeah. Well,
It's good.
so
I love giving him a hard time. Both him and both my grandfathers in the Air Force, and so yeah, that's it's good. So we grew up on bases,
anyway,
and
yeah,
the bases they have, they always have nice bowling alleys, nice golf courses, good quality of life.
I've always referred to West Point as a great place to be from. It is not. It's not really there's a minimal. I had a minimal amount of fun in the 4 years I was there. Although I would say that the last 2 years were generally more fun than not. But it's it's not a program designed to be fun. So
no, but I think to your point, right? It helped me set me up for success as well, and I think the foundation it provides you as a young adult, right, is
oh my God, the opportunities to fail at leading. That you're given there, right, from kind of very early on, the opportunities to lead and figure out kind of, I guess, there's no set way to lead. Everyone has their own. This as an infantryman, right? There is no set pattern for how to lead, and it has to fit with your personality and with your approach to people. You have to come up with your own, for lack of a better term, your own kind of formula of what works for you and what to get people motivated around you to do things that they might not otherwise want or be able to do. And to be able to be thrown into kind of this leadership experiment for 4 years, you get a lot of opportunities to figure out what leadership styles work with you. And some guys come out or women come out of there not having figured it out. But for some, and I would say for me, I came out of there really understanding what worked for me and what style I needed to, and what approach I needed to take to kind of keep the team together and accomplish the mission, right? Which is, in the end, what you're kind of graded on, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think to your point too about getting by but doing the bare minimums in high school and everything else, you're at the next level, and so you're around people that are as talented or more talented in a lot of variety of ways, and it's really humbling. So for me, the other aspect I got out of it was incredibly healthy sense of humility, right? And really set me up for success moving forward.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't as difficult for a lot of folks as it was for me, which is great. That's what I was looking for, right? And then I got a second dose of that when I showed up to grad school at Stanford, right? And now I'm like, it turns out all the BS I was fed by the academy about how I was part of the best and brightest. It turns out maybe that's not so true, right? Now I'm surrounded by folks who came out of all kinds of other great institutions and schools, and it was very clear I was going to get my ass kicked, right? If I didn't step up. And so in some sense, and to be able to go into that experience with the maturity I did, that was as valuable a 2 years as the 4 years of the academy. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And so before you got to Stanford, you served for a period of time.
Yeah.
What was that like? And what?
So I went infantry. It was something I had wanted to do. It's kind of what me and all my friends did. It was the dream, right? Unlike your career, maybe some parallels as well, but very, very quickly, very soon after I got in, I was commissioned. I ended up suffering from a pretty bad, awful disease, and tried to fight it. Tried to do everything I could to avoid not having it disqualify me, but ultimately, there was as much as I would protest it. Ultimately, I as you know, it's a fairly physically demanding job, and it's the reason I loved it. The disease just got the better of me, and I had lost tremendous amounts of weight and really, really couldn't do the job anymore. And at some point, I had to admit to myself that I was just too sick to do this role. And so my career was cut very short. And to a certain extent, and I was very heartbroken at the time. I think there were a fair number of people I was surrounded by who thought I had kind of been given the golden ticket. Like now I don't have to, I can get out of the Army now. I got an education. I can get out of the Army now. And my reaction was the exact opposite of that, which was, I've been training for 4 years for this. I'm really excited about this. I think I could be really good at this. And now it's being kind of pulled out from underneath me. And it was nearly impossible to separate those circumstances from a feeling of actually failing, although I had no control over it. And frankly, I had fought for too long to stay in beyond what was healthy for me. And, avoiding treatment because I didn't want to leave, all kinds of things. Right. And so what came with this was a sense of, honestly, kind of a sense of failure that, and heartbreak, obviously, that still today there are elements of that. If I reach down in, I'm still a little heartbroken over the loss of my military career. Yeah. And I wasn't one of those guys who said, "Oh, I'm gonna, I'm shooting for general." That wasn't. I just wanted to lead. I just wanted to lead combat units, right? That's what I wanted the opportunity to do, and to have that taken away so early in my career was still, in some respects, hasn't healed. But you deal with the hand, you play the hand you're dealt, right?
Yeah, and I think I can definitely relate to some of that. But my career obviously was I was able to deploy and was in for some time before I'd gotten injured. And obviously it was a little different because I couldn't really, well, maybe not. I couldn't really fight it in the same way, I don't think.
Right.
Because it was just an acute injury.
You couldn't hide it.
But at the same time, I don't disagree, or I think I probably had a lot of the similar feelings and emotions and sorts of things that you experience, right? Which was, you feel almost, at certain times, right? It's not the right way to describe it, I guess, but it's almost, you feel sorry, right? You're like, feel sorry for yourself. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did this occur? And then you go through this identity crisis. Where you're like, well, I've been devoting years of my life, or maybe decades.
This is all I know
at this point, right? And this is it,
right?
How do I move forward? What am I going to do, right? And that period.
It's funny.
Stuff is really challenging. So before you answer too, how long was it before you actually were retired?
About 2 years.
Oh wow!
About 2 years.
Literally 2 years after grad. So as soon as you got your unit, this started happening, and and then you're out 2 years later.
Yeah. It actually started happening well before that, but it was controllable.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And then look, ultimately, I guess the proof is in the pudding that I lived with this disease for 17 years, and it ultimately almost killed me in 2000.
Oh wow.
So I got voted closest to death in 2000 by the nursing staff of Scripps Memorial Hospital here in San Diego. So I spent 7 weeks in the hospital, or roughly 7 weeks in the hospital, and nearly didn't come out. But I've been great since 2000. So life is good. Life is good.
It's awesome. Yeah. And so after you left the military, how did that play out? Like with your transition and what was the decision to
honestly,
making all that?
There were really no services available for transitioning out. Like you got handed your DD 214 and it was like, okay, your last paycheck is here's the money for your vacation you didn't take, or I don't remember what we called it, leave time, I guess, or whatever, unpaid leave, or sorry, your untaken leave.
Yeah.
And you find yourself kind of out with no services whatsoever. And so my transition, candidly, was a little bit of a disaster, right? It was really, really rough because I'm dealing with this disease. I'm kind of dealing with the emotional thing of finding myself, just out. My plan is done. And then it gets like a little dark and pathetic, right? Because I drive home to New York from Fort Benning, Georgia, and I kind of move into my parents' house. I move back into my parents' house, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. No idea what I'm going to do, and start job searching. It's interesting. I ended up, I got like a long-term substitute teaching job in the town next door, actually, where my mom spent her whole career teaching. And I was teaching calculus and I think trigonometry. to in high school, which was pretty interesting. I guess the teacher I had replaced was having some serious health issues and was not expect. I don't know. I never knew that person, but it was a long-term substitution job. And then I got offered a job to stay and teach if I, at night go back and get my teaching degree. And I decided that just was not, while I really enjoyed it and I loved being around, the high school. It was kind of fun. Not that different, by the way, from being around troops, right? I just decided that was not gonna satisfy me for the next 30 years. And so through a bunch of contacts, my resume kind of floated around, and I got a call out of the blue from Procter and Gamble, from a recruiter at Procter and Gamble who was in Cincinnati, and asking if I'd be interested in coming to work in Cincinnati. It actually had been, I think had been passed there by kind of the West Point Graduate Network. Someone had passed my resume there. So in that sense, I was really kind of lucky, right?
Yeah.
Now, remember, as you know, you spend 4 years, you don't spend any time trying to figure out what you're going to do in the civilian world. You have no idea what the civilian world is about from a career standpoint.
Yeah.
And so I kind of jumped at the first thing that came to me. And so I went out to Cincinnati, I interviewed, and I got a job in what turned out to be a really prestigious place to be in Procter, and actually in the industry in brand management for Procter and Gamble. And I found myself out there almost, overnight on a brand team, working on a brand team, and trying to get myself excited to sell facial tissue, do marketing and sales for facial tissue.
Yeah.
I got myself promoted from that job in about a year, and took on some required sales training where I basically kind of dragged around a steamer trunk full of maxi pads from grocery store to grocery store in Clearwater Beach, Florida. And then I went back and worked on the introduction of line extensions for the Always Maxi Pad line, right?
Nice.
And while I was surrounded by really talented people and the company taught me a tremendous amount, I kind of hated every minute of it. I can only kind of admit that to myself now, which is kind of strange. I kind of hated every minute of it.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, like when you're doing a job you hate, they don't exactly fall in love with you either, right? Because you're not going to be great at it, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't a rock star at it.
Yeah.
And I hated it. And I was like, this is not going to work either. Like, I just can't get excited about, my friends are in the field, right? And I'm trying to sell maxi pads. I'm writing a share report every 2 months on maxi pads. And it just was such a bad fit for me. It kind of, in some respects, the job kind of preyed upon every one of my weaknesses. And I felt like I spent 80% of my effort managing the organization, and kind of 20% of my effort actually managing and running the business and coming up with ideas for the business. But you come up with some ideas and spend all your time trying to get it through this behemoth organization that, in a lot of respects, is one of the best in the world at doing what it does, but still very bureaucratic, very large, very slow, and very administrative based. And so, I met some great people there. They said, "Boy, you just need to go to business school, and that'll kind of reset you." And I didn't really know what business school was about. I didn't know what it was. I applied to 3 business schools. I got into 2 of them, and I found myself, after 3 years at Procter and Gamble, driving west and showing up at Stanford in 1989, the end of '89, fall of '89, for business school, and not really knowing what to expect, to be honest. A handful of military folks in my class, or former military folks in my class, and having what I can only term as an amazing 2-year experience that was exactly what I needed at the time that I needed it. It gave me the background in business. It gave me exposure to any and every industry, so I could really look at what was happening. It built me a network of people who are not just incredibly bright and driven, but just great folks who wanted to do interesting things, right? And I don't think that's unique to Stanford, but I do think that is a hallmark of Stanford.
Yeah.
There was very little discussion of let's just go out and make money, which to me has never been terribly motivating, right? That wasn't really the discussion amongst me and a large group of my class at Stanford. It was, what can we go out that's actually going to, change the world is a strong statement, but be really interesting and be really enriching, right?
Yeah.
Enriching, not monetarily, in other ways. That was the focus, and that was exactly what I needed.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as I was going through the similar process of trying to figure out business school and how to do all that, one of the interesting things I experienced when I visited Stanford was that kind of culture, the innovation that's ingrained there, and the people that come there, right? It's almost, people are going there just for that ride, and it creates this self-selection where it seems like that's what they're pursuing, right? As opposed to other business schools where they may be pursuing just more corporate jobs or trying to get that job that you had at Procter and Gamble, right? Selling maxi pads or doing brand management or anything like that, right?
Yeah,
that was interesting.
That's really accurate. I think by virtue of its being a little bit of the center of gravity of the valley, right? The culture is, you can't separate the culture from the valley or from innovation, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing which is cool too, I think based on what you were saying, and I'm trying to read a little bit into this, but for what you needed at the time, one of the interesting things that was very, maybe not unique, but I did notice and pick up on while I was there was because I feel like the experience that I had when I was there, just visiting and kind of going to a couple classes and seeing people and meeting the cohort that was there for the class, they a lot of times didn't really care where you were from or what you did. Even on the veteran side, which, some people are like, oh man, that's kind of, shocking. Like they should be, recognizing you and understanding this and diversity and stuff. But on the other side, it was actually kind of refreshing too, because it's like people can go somewhere, totally reinvent themselves, right, in this unique and innovative way, and then come out the other side. And, and it's also kind of fosters that culture of like, what are you doing today? Right. Like not what you did in the past, right? Like, I don't care. You were an investment banker at UBS or whatever else, right?
No one really cares what you did. It's what you've got going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And that's a refreshing place to be, right? Because I really, in some sense, I was coming off feeling like a failure in my military career, and then kind of being maybe a C or a C minus in my first job out of the military. And so I'd really kind of taken an ego and a confidence hit out of these things, right? Like, is there something I'm going to be good at here that I'm going to be allowed to do, right? The thing I was really good at, I was not allowed to do. And then I got into a job that I really wasn't great at because, well, I just really wasn't great at. And so the ability to spend 2 years figuring out, oh, there are some things out here, and being able to actually just reflect for 2 years on what you're really good at and how you can apply that in the civilian world was really valuable to me.
Yeah. And so during that period of time, obviously it was a pretty wild transition, wild ride for you with a lot of ups and downs and unexpected turns. But what were, I think based on what you're saying, what I'm hearing is, there were a lot of the things that helped you move forward and move through that were the people you were around and the environment you're with and the teams you were around. But is that accurate? And was there anything else that helped you kind of like, what helped set you up for success or reinvigorate you as you kind of found your new path?
For me, it has always nearly always been two things. One is, am I going down a steep learning curve? How do I keep myself down, down a steep learning curve, right? And as soon as that learning curve flattens out, I get bored pretty easily, and then trouble ensues, right? And so I look for things to make life, to get me on a steeper learning curve, right? And those may or may not be terribly productive things, right? The second is, who am I surrounded by? And am I surrounded by people who I consider to be more talented than I am, smarter than I am, who I can really learn from? And so if I can have a combination of those things going on in my life, when I've had a combination of those things going on in my life, I've tended to be really happy and really productive. And ultimately, that's what led me right to wanting to be in the kind of the world of startups, because you're always on a steep learning curve, and the best thing about it was I could build my own team, right? I could surround myself with really talented people,
Yeah.
and the ability to control who I was with and what I was working on led to, almost regardless of what you're working on, almost regardless of what the path is and what you think the outcome is going to be, the ability to be learning and to be surrounded by really talented people. I figured if I could satisfy those two things, everything else would kind of take care of itself. And it has. Shockingly, it has. Right.
For sure.
For me, right. Those were the
Yeah.
those were the things that worked for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think it makes it very clear, how you ended up in entrepreneurship and in the tech sector, right? And pursuing these types.
It's funny. I spent 2 years at the Boston Consulting Group right after business school. One of the reasons was that I knew I wanted to go do a startup, and I was leaving business school with a lot of debt. And I figured I could spend a couple of years working at BCG, getting some maturity under me, getting some experience, and paying off my debt, right? Because they kind of back the truck up there from a cash perspective, right? And so, right, it's kind of shocking.
You don't say.
Yeah, and you know what? The reality is that I loved my 2 years at BCG. I really had a great experience. I probably would have stayed at BCG had my wife not really wanted to leave Chicago. I was in the Chicago office, really wanted to leave Chicago and get back to the West Coast for her career. They gave me the opportunity then to go to the San Francisco office, but it was at exactly that time that I got called by a classmate who was doing a startup, my first startup. And I was like, and so I told BCG this, and they said, well, go do the startup, and if it doesn't work, come back to the San Francisco office, which I could very well have done and been actually pretty happy, surrounded by great people, working on a variety of projects all the time. So you're always learning and you're always surrounded by great people. Mm-hmm. It was a culture that I loved. It was a healthy culture. And I actually have very fond memories of the BCG experience. But then once I kind of dipped my toe into building a business, even though that first one was, really not successful. It wasn't like we didn't crash completely, but it was pretty close to that. Once I had experience doing that, I realized, okay, it's going to be tough to do anything but lead business startups,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Once you've had a taste of it, it's hard to leave.
Yeah. And in some respects, I was lucky because I did it with a team of really great folks. It turns out the business wasn't very good, but I had learned a tremendous amount. And I'd spent, I think, maybe 2.5, 3 years doing that. And then got recruited to be pretty senior in the next startup, moved to LA and start up City Search with a team that, to this day is somewhat, it's kind of rivaled only in some respects at that time by the PayPal, team. The companies that have been born out of that team that first started up City Search is just, the list is amazing, right? And this group of folks who we built that company with over the course of the next 3 years, was in some respects for me just transformative, and some of my best friends are from that experience. So, and let's be clear, it wasn't easy. It was long, hard slog, right? With really difficult at times, but always felt like an adventure. The whole thing always felt like an adventure.
Yeah.
And I was able to replicate a mess of that. At Active when I came to Active shortly after it was founded. The downside was that in '95 it was really easy when you were running I wasn't running it, but when you're involved in a kind of high profile startup, this was at the end of '95, high profile startup in the web, you could pull the most talented people out of any industry. The most talented, entrepreneurially focused folks, interested folks out of any industry.
Wow.
By the end of 99 or 2000, and don't get me wrong, I ended up with an amazing team at Active, building an amazing team. But it was much harder to find that amount of talent because there were so many other options out there. At the end of '95, when I went to City Search, there were not that many, amazing, options that were out there. This was really unique. By 2000, There were lots of great technology options related somehow to software or the internet or software as a service, and recruiting just became harder, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I would think so. And I think
but
that's probably a trend that's continued to today, right? Like with growing need and more options, right? I can't imagine.
yeah,
Just,
so much competition for talent, right?
yeah.
So it was interesting. The City Search thing happened at exactly the right time in the right place.
Yeah.
And it was, in a sense, a culmination of everything I had done prior to that.
Wow. Yeah. So at that point, you feel like you've gone through this experience, you've reinvented yourself, you've had these other experiences, and kind of found yourself at the crossroads with doing, what you wanted to be doing with the people you wanted to be doing it with, and found alignment in your overall purpose, for what you wanted to do in your life.
Yeah. So now let me give you the downside, right? And I'm sure you've felt some of this as well. Um, Ultimately, a career in business may come across. I often come across as having a stronger opinion about things than I do. Um, that's just kind of the way I deliver things. I think I'm far more open to being convinced otherwise than I think I sound. Um, Ultimately, a career in business is measured on the amount of money you make and you make for others. There's a lot of window dressing around, and this is for-profit business. There's a lot of window dressing around doing good and changing the world and doing, things other than that. But ultimately, you really are measured on the amount of money you make people and the amount of money you make yourself. And so for me, the most dissatisfying thing about a business career has been exactly that. There really is not much in the way of a sustainable higher calling. So I always focused on building amazing teams, recruiting just really talented folks and coaching them and leading them. That's where I got all my satisfaction out of my career. I never got the satisfaction. I got satisfaction actually out of generating returns for my financial backers because they believed in me, and I proved, I had to prove to them that they had made the right decision, right?
Yeah.
But I never got very much satisfaction out of making money for myself, to be candid, right? The only time I ever made a career decision based on money was that BCG decision, which I think at the time was right because I went and basically worked for free after that in my first startup because I didn't have any debt, right?
Nice.
But since that BCG decision, I've never made a decision based on money. It's always been based on who am I going to be surrounded by, and am I working on something I'm going to be excited about? Always with the idea that, yeah, I have a responsibility for securing the financial future of my family. And I understand that some financial independence brings independence overall and gives you options and choices. And so that's good. But I never wanted to be in a position, and thankfully I never had to be in a position where I got out of bed and said, let's go make money today.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of jobs where that's the objective, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go make money today.
Yeah.
And I think that works for some people. It's in some respects, it's not only not motivating for me, it's kind of demotivating for me. Like I look down on myself for thinking that way. I always have to have a higher calling, which is probably the exact same reason I went to West Point, right? I always built in some higher calling. It's building a team. It's creating something interesting. It's bringing something to my customers that they never would have had otherwise. Some higher purpose other than making money. And ultimately, when you go and build a big business, and your business becomes bigger and bigger, and your financial backers, for them, it becomes higher and higher stakes. The job ultimately becomes about making money. Yeah. And for me, I never liked that part of the job. And it became a higher percentage of the job as the business gets bigger and your responsibilities get bigger. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're highlighting is a really important point. And so I talk to a lot of people who ask for entrepreneurship advice and how to get started and how to do this and whatever else. And usually the advice I give them is very similar because what I see a lot of times, a lot of people kind of have that notion or that perception or common misperception that, the entrepreneurship is a way to get rich, and it's a way to get, make money and to do this and everything else. And, I don't know that I've seen an entrepreneur who's been successful financially without other aspects of the business that are impactful for them. They have other reasons of why they get up and get out of bed every day. And that was kind of what helped me find my next, role as I was transitioning and leaving the military, as well as I was going back to business school, trying to figure it out. I had talked to someone and they said, "Hey, Derek, you'd be really good at selling stocks, man. You'd make so much money." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, why?" Right. And they're like,
To make
"Didn't
money.
you just hear me?" Like, look at me like I was from another planet. Right. And I was like, you and I are not the
I'm
same.
not wired that way.
So as I did that, what I thought about was similar, which was like, and I found a really good alignment of incentives in the med tech industry and the med device industry specifically, which is it's for profit, but no business will be profitable or make money unless the hardware or software or the devices that you're building actually improve patients' quality of life or clinical outcomes or have some real value that you can demonstrate, right? And then it's the symbiotic cycle where it's like the better you are at doing that, the more money you'll make, right? But the money is good and it's important for companies and corporations, but really the purpose is like focusing on patients, man. How many can I help and how fast can I help them, right? And that's the value. But even it sounds like to your point of what you were saying, right? Even in some of the things that are a little more esoteric or may not be able to draw the line with the real, life-changing impact or changing the world with software, right? You're able to find these other aspects of the business that kept you going.
Oh yeah, I was always able to find something to keep me really motivated, and it was usually around building and coaching teams to take on really hard things, to try to solve really hard problems. That to me was really interesting, and being surrounded by really talented folks who I could learn from. That was very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And taking on their success as my responsibility, right? To me, that's kind of my definition of leadership, which is taking on others' success as your own responsibility. If you own their success and feel responsible for their success, and behave in a way that you feel responsible for their success, it's amazing what people will do, right, on those teams. If they know you want them to be successful, it's crazy what teams will do, whether that's in the military or inside the military or out of the military.
Yeah.
It's funny. I took, as you did, years and years of leadership training, right? And no one ever really boiled it down that far for me. That to me is the thing that works for me, which is if someone's on my team, am I doing everything I possibly can to help them be successful? Now, look, there are people who are going to fail. There are people who are not going to be successful. But it's not because I didn't do everything I can to help them be successful.
Yeah.
When it becomes evident that they're still going to fail, then I don't have a lot of patience, to be honest, right? Usually it has to do with attitude and approach, to be honest, not with capability and talent. Usually it has to do with attitude and approach. If you got the right attitude and approach, I'll find a role where you can be successful in. Yeah. But if I'm giving you everything I can to help you be successful and you're still failing, there's something going on, right, that I can't fix. And then I'm off the hook.
Yeah.
But I'm on the hook until that moment. And I figured out that if my teams knew that and felt that, and of course, as you know, you can't fake it, right? You either care about people or you don't. And we all know the leaders who didn't really care about us, but wanted us to think they cared about us, right? You can't fake it for very long. But if they believe it, if your team understands that you really give a shit about them, you want them to succeed, and you're there to help them succeed, shocking what those teams will do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're a leader who doesn't fundamentally care about people's success, you may still be somewhat successful, but it's nowhere near as much fun, and you're not going to achieve the things you could have achieved otherwise.
Yeah. I would probably claim, to your point, right, like the loyalty that you exercise up and down, right, through that leadership chain, like, it's reciprocal, right? So like as much as you give, people will give back to you in most cases, And so if you're totally selfless and totally vested in their interests, that's the best thing you can do, I think, as a leader, because every person that you're doing that for under your command or in your team will be as interested in seeing you succeed and seeing the team succeed, right? And that's what generates outsized returns, is getting everybody on the same page to push.
It's amazingly motivating to an E2 who's a machine gunner to know that his leader is there to make him the best machine gunner that he can be. And that he may not aspire to be a machine gunner the rest of his life. I doubt very seriously most of them do, right? They have their own aspirations. But for now, they're a machine gunner. And if they understand that you want them to be the best machine gunner around and you're going to help them get there, shocking what they will do. Shocking what they will do, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for a product manager or a developer. If you spend the time to understand what needs to happen for them to be successful in their job and help them get there, right? They every one of them will run through fire for you.
Yeah. It's amazing. So, yeah. And
people want to succeed.
Yeah.
Most people want to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to somebody about that a long time ago, and I never heard somebody mention that until we had this discussion. And, somebody who had been continually underperforming in one of our units. And it was very apparent to other leaders within the organization. And we're like, what's going on with this guy? They're like, hey, back off, man. Like, I'm working with him. He's developing skills, right? I need, just give him some break, give him some slack, let him come up to speed, right? It's not a will, and what they said to me is said, you think he wakes up every day wanting to come and, suck at work, right? Like he doesn't, he just needs mentorship and guidance and education and training.
As long as the attitude is there, right?
Yeah.
As long as there's a positive attitude and as long as they want to succeed, it rarely goes wrong. It rarely goes sideways.
Yeah.
You find the right role for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I won't digress into it, but one of my favorite things that I learned, I'm not big into like charts and frameworks and stuff, but there's, XY chart with will and skill.
Right.
Oh
my God, dude. I got to show you the one I developed for the sales training I put together.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. Yeah. I can move you along the skill axis. I can't move you. I've never been successful moving you for any period of time along the will axis.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can bring out the confetti cannon and, and the big giant check and all the rest. Right. And that keeps you motivated for a month. Right. Yeah. Or a week.
Yeah.
Right. That moves you along the will scale or axis for, minusculely for a short period of time. Right. If you're not willing to move yourself along the will axis, how much time am I supposed to spend moving you along the skill axis? And so I have a really funny, I should send it to you. I have a really funny 2x2 matrix of that.
Yeah.
That I use in sales training that goes to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know I don't know who came up with it first or where I saw it at business school or whatever. I don't know where it was, but I still talk about it today and it's awesome. And so just for anyone listening, right, the short answer or the short explanation is, X-axis or Y-axis will, right? So unwilling or willing, right? Like, are you willing to show up and willing to invest time and energy and put forth an effort, and then skill, unskilled or skilled, right? Do I have the skills to be successful or not, right? Am I failing because I don't know what I'm doing? And so unless you're unwilling, right, you can be trained, right? You can be trained and educated to perform better and or you can find them a job, right? So, hey, maybe software engineering isn't your thing, but we'll put you in marketing or whatever, right? Repurpose you.
Right.
But to your point, right, what you're saying is if you don't want to be here, I can't make you, I can't teach you to want to be here, right? I can't make you want to come to work every day and work hard, so.
It's funny because of those four quadrants, and I talk about I have a name for each of those four quadrants. And of those four quadrants, there are, there's kind of really one real enigma, right? The real enigma is the guy with or the woman with the worker with a bad attitude but amazing skill set.
What do you call those? I have a
I'm
name
trying.
for
I
them.
think I think I actually have a question mark in that one. Like I'm
So
not sure what to call these
for
people.
that one,
Right?
I call those mercenaries.
Yeah, but mercenaries gives me the sense that if you pay them enough money, they're gonna, yeah, I guess they're gonna perform, right? The
Yeah, but
the problem. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, you're right. And unless I don't know if that's the right term or not. I just that was the best thing I could think of. Uh,
Yeah,
Mainly
it's like
because
it's amazing to me. You're incredibly skilled, but your attitude sucks, right?
yeah,
Like, and I've had a couple of those in my career, and if you can keep them, those are folks who can be really destructive to your organization because they kind of know what they're doing and their attitude sucks, right?
yeah,
And they're bringing in business, so like they're the folks no one wants to cut, but they think they're a huge pain in the ass, right? Um,
yeah,
um, if you can, those are folks who you actually, it's worth spending time on pushing along the motivation track. And the issue is, what I discovered was that they're just not motivated the way other people are motivated. And so you have to come up with completely different, you have to assume completely different motivations in
yeah,
the way you lead them, right? And they can be amazing for an organization if you can move them kind of to the right on the will scale.
yeah.
But they're enigmas. You don't run into a lot of them, frankly. Right?
No, no, and I think the mercenary thing. I had a bad experience. So when I was first starting Spinal Singularity, we didn't need full-time software engineers, and it's really expensive, and we didn't have a lot of money for finding a software engineer who could do what we were doing, which was firmware for embedded systems and that sort of thing. And so I found somebody. He was very talented, incredibly talented, but
Tough to keep on
all I
task.
could motivate him with was money, and we didn't have a lot of it. And it was like, so I found myself doing exactly what you're saying, which is trying to be creative and think of different ways and just empathize and understand how can I get this guy to deliver what we need to deliver. And, and that's been interesting. And then other people too that I've
I've
met.
worked at a company, by the way, where the entire engineering team was that way, seemingly.
Oh, wow.
Maddening, maddening, maddening. Yeah.
Can't imagine who had to go wake up every day and manage that. Yeah. It's like,
Oh, just yeah. It was a revolution every day. Anyway, yeah.
yeah. So for those people, right, it's like you don't necessarily want to work with them, but they're skilled, so you use them for certain sporadic engagements when you absolutely need them to come in and do a certain
Right.
thing or whatever. And
Yeah.
I had other people that I met in these companies, and they're like, they talk about some of these enigmas, right? And specifically in the software engineering, for some reason, this is the most recent examples I've had. They're like, that guy will sit and that guy or girl can sit and do nothing and be totally unproductive for 3 months. But then in one day of productivity, it's worth an entire year of keeping him on payroll. And you're like, you're a savant. I don't know. Like, I'm glad I'm not the one managing that, right? Because like that, like you said to your point, the culture of that organization, if you're keeping somebody on payroll and staff just sitting around doing nothing, right? Like, is that the culture you want to build?
Yeah, that's a leadership challenge, right?
Yeah. And so if you have other options, that's
I
kind of
hope
where
that day is tomorrow, is what I always feel like. Is that today?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I could really use it. I could really use it if it were today.
Yeah, that's kind of where we came up with the mercenaries, right? Was like you avoid it if at all possible,
Right?
in extremis, and so on and so forth. But I'm sure there's a better name, so we should jam another time and try to brainstorm another name.
Yeah, I'll send you my little 2x2.
Yeah,
It's got some humor in it, so you gotta. It's designed to motivate a sales team, right? But it's also designed to have them thinking about which box they belong in and what are they supposed to be doing, right? What are they going to do different tomorrow to get in the upper right-hand corner, right?
Yeah, it's awesome.
So,
love it.
Yeah,
awesome. And so, talking about salespeople and your experience managing these teams and everything, love to hear the story of Active briefly and how you were there. You had a pretty phenomenal run.
Sure.
And I didn't know this, but I just putting two and two together now. You mentioned you were in the hospital and almost died. Which from your timeline, it looks like right after you joined Active, you
shortly after
a
I joined
2-month
Active,
break to go in the hospital and almost die, and then came back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I won't go into the story about how I found these guys. It came through a contact at City Search, which we had put together with Ticketmaster Online. Ticketmaster guys were identifying other areas where they thought other areas for call it ticketing, but different types of ticketing. They termed it off-road ticketing. And they had identified a few companies in the sports space, specifically in the endurance sports space, that had started up to do very specifically online registration for running races and triathlon. That's where Active started. And so they had funded. They had made the decision to fund the combination of two of these little startups that had no revenue at the time. And they came to me and said these guys are looking for a new CEO to, basically a third-party CEO to come and run the combined entity. So I came down to La Jolla from LA, where we were running City Search, and interviewed and with the founders, and they had raised a little bit of money already. But I think I got here at the end of '99. I think revenue for '99 was like $75,000 or something like that. So it was pretty much pre-revenue. But I don't call myself a founder. Yeah. They had a little bit of software. It turned out most of it was not terribly functional, and we ended up rebuilding most of it. But sometimes you got to go through that to figure out how you're going to solve the problem, right? It's not until you write the software that you figure out the way you chose to solve the problem is not that doesn't extend very well to other things, right? And so it turns out the problem that needs to be solved is a different problem, right? So came down here at the end of '99 and kind of dug in and ended up hiring, bringing down as a president of the organization, a classmate from Stanford who I had also done my first startup with. And he was actually at the time running a public company in the Bay Area. And he thought it was interesting enough to come down. And so he joined me would become kind of my business partner on it. Honestly, I've said this to a lot of folks. I thought I'd be down here 2 or 3 years. Remember, I got here at the kind of the height of the internet bubble, right? I got here, I figured I'd be here 2 or 3 years and we'd sell it to someone, or Ticketmaster would buy it, or something. Something would happen. And it turned into 13 and a half years, a 13 and a half year job. And we went from ostensibly zero revenue to about $500 million in annual revenue, and about roughly 4,000 employees spread all over the world. All over the world.
That's awesome.
Everything from, this is very early on in offshoring software development. We had to do a tremendous amount of software development. And so we didn't really want to outsource it, but we wanted to offshore it. And so we opened our own offices in China. And hired our own developers in China and ran it as an owned and operated operation rather than outsourcing it. We had some resources in the company that kind of allowed us to do that made that able. It made us capable of doing that. We realized fairly early that you weren't going to build a sizable business in triathlon and running races, although that piece of business turned into a good sized business, but you weren't going to build $1 billion business on that. And so we just started looking at adjacent spaces where we could bring software to bear that no one else had done, which was mostly around registration management, fee management, so the financial side of it, SaaS functionality on the back end for actually managing those events and those organizations. And we went on kind of a tear of acquiring small private companies that had varying degrees of footprint in their respective adjacent vertical. None of them were very big. I think the biggest company we acquired maybe had $20 million in revenue at the time. I'll probably have someone call me and tell me I was dead wrong on that. But we did end up acquiring a company called Reserve America. It was really a spin out from Ticketmaster that was in the outdoor space. That was sizable. That was bigger. But I think all the other companies were sub $20 million. Most of them were sub $1 million and had kind of an expert in the vertical and someone who knew how to code and the business rules for that vertical. We ended up in the corporate event space. We ended up in automating, maybe 2,500 parks and recreation departments around the country, including the New York City Parks and Recreation Department. We automated hunting and fishing licensing and campground reservations. in something like 30 states in the National Park Service. Maybe 35 states in all. We automated the running of a church and its recreational or its kind of non-worship related activities, which, as you know, are pretty extensive particularly in large churches throughout the South. Schools, organizing software for fee management and registration management for school activities and extracurricular school activities. Little League Baseball used us to run everything. Wow. The United States Tennis Association used us to run all of their community tennis, which was 7,000 local tournaments a year.
Wow.
They didn't use us for the U.S. Open, which is happening right now, but they used us for all their community tennis, which was a big part of their operation.
Yeah.
We just kind of went from one vertical to the next, trying to automate things that no one else was willing to automate, because it was always perceived as any one of these verticals were too small to be able to service profitably. I can say with a surety, it was never easy. Right? There was a reason that these spaces had not been automated.
Yeah.
It's funny. Since then, I've had a guy who worked on the active team at a fairly senior level, and not on the active team, but had worked at Ticketmaster on a fairly senior level, and has gone on to build other companies. He's coined the phrase like "get on an up elevator." It was fairly clear with active that I was not while I was in an expanding space and in a great space to be from a SaaS, just generally SaaS software. It was not an up elevator. Right. And so there wasn't $1 of revenue that came in over those 13 and a half years for which I wasn't kind of expecting like $1.10. And that I hadn't had to go out and fight for every last dollar of revenue. But it sure was rewarding. And it was an amazing space to be in. And the nice thing about being in that space was it attracted very interesting, smart people who were interested in the verticals in which we operated in. They weren't just interested in writing software. They were interested in how schools managed extracurricular activities. They were interested in how how you could actually make a park and recreation department, which are huge, huge organizations, far more efficient through the automation of some of their activities.
Yeah.
So it was a very rewarding job, but also an exhausting and stressful one.
Yeah. And 13 years, I mean, it's a long time.
Yeah. I mean, look, startup CEOs don't last. Venture-backed CEOs generally last almost, 13 and a half years. And at 13 and a half years, the board decided they had had enough of me. That the direction I wanted to take the company was not the direction they wanted to take it. And I had kind of offered that up to them. I had said, look, I think this is what we need to do with the company. I think this is the investment we need to make going forward. And if you don't want to do that, I get it. But I'm not really interested in the status quo. And they took me up on my offer. Which, as it turns out, was a little bit of a dissatisfying way to leave after after 13 and a half years. But I never regretted the decision I had made to offer that to them. I never regretted putting them in that position, because it turns out, I mean, I knew at the time it was the right thing for the company, and 3 months later they figured out it was the right thing for the company as well. And so I always knew I was acting on the best part of what was right for the company. And so while it was dissatisfying to leave that way, it turned out just fine. Yeah. And after 13 and a half years, it was probably time for me to take a break from that slog anyway. And so it's a long time to slog.
Yeah. It's a long time. Yeah. And just to take a step back too, so City Search, you guys took that company public, right? So you're a senior leader at City Search.
Chief operating officer of the City Guide business at the time. Yeah. I was running the City Guide business at the time. Yeah.
You guys just go public, leave your job to go join a small 2 or 3 person company with 75K in revenue,
Yeah,
right?
more like it was probably more like 25 folks by the time the two companies came together, something
Oh,
like
okay,
that.
gotcha. Yeah, so
Yeah,
small organization, right? So,
yeah,
and then you call your buddy from Stanford, right, who also is running a public company, convince him to quit
yeah.
his job and come down and join the dream team, right?
Well,
And then just roll this
yeah. I
out
mean,
for
we
13
both,
years.
we had both been athletes in our lives, and the idea of being able to work in the sports space, which is where we really started, had a lot of appeal after, you know,
Yeah,
working in spaces that I wasn't nearly as excited about necessarily, right? And
for sure.
so that was part of my recruiting for Interactive was you get to build a really high margin product. Well, ultimately, hopefully high margin product, an interesting product, solve an interesting software problem, um, while at the same time actually operating in a space you're really interested in.
Yeah.
This was a really fun community in which to operate and to bring automation to. So
Yeah. It sounds awesome. Yeah, and I thought about the triathlon aspect of it. That was what I was most familiar with, and the race and stuff. But um, all the other verticals you just mentioned sound even more impactful, right? Like Parks and Rec, like
yeah,
getting
I think our sports
streamline
business
that.
ultimately was about $100 million business, but it included all youth sports and golf, and I'm sure I'm forgetting, and a whole mess of adult league sports. Um, I think our sports business was ultimately about $100 million revenue business, and out of nearly half a billion, right? So
Yeah.
I think
It,
we had about $100 million business in outdoor business, so hunting and fishing, the hook and bullet crowd, and camping.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's what I was
and
going
that
to
was a
mention, which I think was awesome because, like, you know, thinking about it now, right? It's tough to envision all the pain that was experienced then, but previously, right before you guys automated all this stuff, it was old fashioned, right? You
all of
show
these
up,
things
you try to get
were
a spot, you try to fill out a piece of paper, do all this stuff, and you're able to do this in a streamlined way, which saves people time and money and increase efficiencies, and ultimately leads to this impact, right? Of like people having more fun and more ability to access the outdoors, right? Or get
yeah. I
sports, a lot of
ultimately
stuff.
believe that we actually grew participation in the spaces in which we operated. I
Hmm.
think we freed up organizers to actually go and grow their business rather than manage their business. I think we made them easier to access. Um, Look, triathlon exploded in the early 2000s. I'm not suggesting that we were the sole cause of that, or the sole origin of that. I think though we were a catalyst for it. We were one of the catalysts behind that explosion of triathlon and in the 2000s.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so after leaving that, you've had a variety of roles now, mainly
Mm.
advising and investing and
Yep.
coaching, right? And so which after leaving that, how did you transition into this role now? And
I
what
packed
have you been
8
up
bags
to?
for 4 family members, and we flew to Paris and spent a year living in Paris.
Oh wow, nice.
Which I put my girls into second and local school for second and fourth grade, and they still resent me for that 8 years later. They had a rough year in school. We had an amazing year in Paris. I just needed a way, and I needed a break from my email and spreadsheets and personnel problems and all the things that come with running a big business, Wall Street.
Yeah,
Um, and came home with the decision that I wasn't ready to go run another big company. I didn't know how I'd come home, to be honest. I thought I'd come home ready to run another big company. I came home not really desirous of running another big company, um, but just kept getting phone calls to join boards, join advisory boards, invest in businesses being started up by former teammates of mine. Um, and so I've really spent I'm shockingly busy for a guy without a job. I'm sitting on 3 or 4 corporate boards. I have invested in probably another dozen small businesses. Now some of them are not small anymore. Always, almost exclusively investing in people who I have a personal relationship with already.
gotcha.
I'm not really interested in investing for financial reasons. I'm interested in investing to A, help, to B, stay involved and learn, and last, I hope not to lose my money, but even that I don't get too worked up over.
Yeah,
Um, it's really about helping friends build something interesting and staying relevant myself.
Yeah.
And so I make small investments generally in friends companies, friends startups, and then occasionally I'll join some boards of companies that I may not have, that may be much further along, venture back, that I haven't invested in, but I bring something to the table and I can help a CEO, figure out how to do, hopefully figure out how to do the job.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can bring some experience to the CEO is basically what it comes down to.
For sure. Yeah, and it sounds like an awesome way to scale, your impact and still have access to similar fulfillment in the community without as much day-to-day minutia and stress and everything, right? Like where you can now step back
Right.
as a coach and a mentor and help enable other leaders and advise, right? So that's really interesting.
So I'd be remiss not to not mention that I do miss the ownership, but I really don't miss the stress of running a business, because I don't deal. I mean, I guess I deal with the stress fine, but I find running businesses an all-encompassing thing, and it's not terribly healthy for me, right? So
yeah.
It's been nice to spend the last 7 or 8 years, I guess 8 years, after missing the first 10 years of my kids' lives, essentially. And so it's been nice to be back in their lives in a big way. And that's really, really incredibly rewarding. I do miss some of the ownership, but I don't miss the frantic and the constant firefighting and all the rest. Don't miss that.
Yeah.
I've said this before. To me, the reason I've been successful, and there are lots of paths to success in entrepreneurial endeavors. So this is not by any means the path. In fact, I don't recommend it. Right. I am a paranoid optimist. I always believe that I always wake up thinking I've never once thought I'm going to fail at this. I've never once gotten out of bed thinking I'm going to go fail at something today. Right. My attitude is always, we'll figure this out and we're going to be successful. Right. Always that. But at the same sense, when I'm not feeling that way, which is, kind of a small sliver of the time. No, I guess that's always the underlying thing is we're going to be successful. We're going to solve these problems and we're going to do great things, right? Everyone here is going to be successful, whatever your measure of success is. But the way I get there is by worrying about every millimeter along the way and creating every possible crisis scenario that could happen and problem solving for it before it does happen. And that's not a terribly healthy way to go through life. Right? Spending all of your time worried about what's going to happen. You know exactly the feeling as an infantry platoon commander, right? Or as an infantry unit commander.
Yeah.
When you're out on that patrol, all you're doing is running the scenarios of where it's going to go bad. And what am I going to do when that happens? And how can I anticipate where this is going to go bad? And what should I be doing, or what should I be thinking of right now as to what I'm going to do when it goes south, right?
Yeah.
I brought that exact same attitude out of the military into a startup, and it's not a great way to go through life, candidly, right? It's not healthy.
Yeah. Can't
be healthy, right?
Yeah, I
don't know. Am I right?
I think you're right, but I think the point is less on. I don't think it's as black and white as you may be making it to be. I think it's more gray, right? And so nobody wants to be carefree and blindsided by any single contingency, right? But then you don't want to be paralyzed by fear and over-analysis, right? So I think it's a spectrum. I would claim it's probably a spectrum, right? And so if you're tending to have increased levels of stress and everything, because there is a chance, right? Or, I mean, I'll throw the question back to you, right? Is like preparing for those contingencies. How often did that pan out, or did it pay off, right? Like those contingencies may have occurred, you were ready and you had a plan, which may have helped you execute or cycle faster. But, was it, you're in your head, you're preparing for thousands.
Here's the thing. Remember remember that most of those contingencies are not major company killing things, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So on the things that are minor, it happened all the time. Like, oh, I saw that coming, right? We're prepared for that, right? Little things, right?
Yeah.
That happens all the time. The major things that came, a handful of them over the course of a career, right? So, look, I guess, I really did 3 startups, and 2 of them were really very, very successful. So those, that, I don't think that's normal, right? So something went right, but at what cost?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, right, it's at a pretty high personal cost, right? Because, you're not just there 9 to 5, right? You're thinking every minute of every day about what's going wrong, what can happen.
Oh yeah. And to be clear, I'm not paranoid, walking around paranoid to all of the folks on my team, right? Although I'm asking the right questions of, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Right. I'm not running around as like the paranoid madman, right? Right. But in fact, I'm generally probably considered incredibly optimistic, right? And supportive. This is all going to work out. We're going to figure it out, right? We're going to solve for these problems. But then when I'm alone and in my head, all I'm doing is thinking about what those problems are going to be.
Yeah.
And it's, while I love problem solving, and I was energized by it, and there were very few days I woke up and thought, I make it 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, probably almost 20 years of startups, right? Of early stage companies. I can count on, a couple of hands, the number of days I woke up and said, oh, I really don't want to do this today.
Yeah.
Boy, if you can do that for 20 years, that doesn't mean it's healthy to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. But
so
it seems like it was enjoyable. Right. And,
yeah. I have very few regrets about my career. But I also know that I think stepping away from a big operating job when I did or not going back into a big operating job has been the right decision for me. I don't think it would have been healthy for me.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
As I say to a guy who's about to do a new startup.
Yeah.
You're a lot younger than me, dude.
I haven't done 20 years yet. So I got another 14 to go. So
right.
Hopefully.
And like I said, I don't recommend this approach. And there are lots of people who are successful without being as paranoid as I've been. Right.
Yeah.
For me, it worked, but it's not something I really want to put myself back into.
Of course not. No.
Yeah. And by the way, it makes me, talk to my wife. Like, don't think that paranoia doesn't kind of sneak into other parts of my life. Right. I must be a pain in the ass to deal with. Right.
Yeah. She's still with you. So you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Selected well. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. Well, excellent. So, what does the future hold for you? Are you going to continue on the path you're on with just advising and investing? And
we'll see. I don't know. I'm pretty interested in public service again, and so I'm trying to figure that out. It's tough for an old guy like me to jump into public service and get something meaningful because I haven't had a whole career in public service. So I've started to dabble a little bit in public service and trying to figure out what's motivating to me and what I'd be good at. So I would like to find myself back again doing something in the public service arena that is not. I mean, I guess it could be a nonprofit. As you know, I do a mess of work in with the Honor Foundation, helping folks transition successfully. But there might be a public sector role that I'd find rewarding, and so I've got kind of my ear to the ground on that. I'm not really pursuing it in a big way, but I've got my ear to the ground and I'm talking to folks about it. I'm doing my 50 my 50 cups of coffee.
Nice.
On public service roles that might be appropriate for an old guy like me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I couldn't suggest it more for someone at your stage and for someone with your background and sense of purpose and duty. Like the system's lacking people with your experience.
Yeah, my fear is frustration with bureaucracy. That's my fear. After having the freedom to run pretty independently for 20 years. So that's something I got to think about. Um, but it's been a consideration for me. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know enough to know either way, but I would assume there's processes and systems, and I would be willing to bet you'd figure it out and find a way to make impact and be successful. So
Yeah, that's yeah,
I'm optimistic.
so that's
So
that's what I'm
I would be a paranoid optimist, just like you.
yeah.
So
I'm not I'm not political, and I don't like being political and being forced to be political, and that's a
even better.
handicap today in every, but it's a handicap today in most public service sectors.
Yeah.
You gotta, so for meaningful roles.
Yeah.
So
I'm
that
yeah, I'm optimistic that'll change hopefully at some point as well. I don't know that the path we're on is sustainable.
yeah,
So
I'm pretty sure it's not.
I'm optimistic that more people like yourself who are willing to put, other things and other interests ahead of their own personal interests will get more involved. And I started to see that, right? I think we're starting to see that. So actually, more and more people with similar beliefs and values and experiences, I think, as us, are starting to step into that arena. And it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, leaders, real leaders, will step forward and be willing to put themselves in that position.
Yeah, it would be nice to get self-interest out of the public arena, and I don't know the path to that, but again, I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
So
Well, you have my support. So
thanks, buddy.
I live in California. I still vote here. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think I'm going to run for elected position, but I would like to get involved in the right way. So
For sure. That's awesome. Heck yeah. It's phenomenal. This has been an amazing conversation, and I am so thankful, grateful that you were willing to spend so much time sharing these stories with us. Anything else you want to share before we close out?
Dude, it's always fun with
Appreciate
you,
your
and
time.
I don't get to see you enough. So even this opportunity just to have a discussion between us, regardless if anyone listens to it, it's just really nice. So
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, and hopefully come down see you sometime soon in San Diego and
would
catch
love
up.
that.
So, excellent. And for anyone else listening, what's the best way for them to find you? Is it just through LinkedIn or
Probably LinkedIn is the
website?
best way.
Okay,
Yeah, probably LinkedIn is probably the best way. Yeah, I don't have a website, so
gotcha.
I'm trying to stay. I've spent my whole career trying to stay a little bit lower profile. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well,
All right,
excellent.
buddy.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it. This has been another episode of Forward with me, Derek Herrera, and Dave Alberga. Hope y'all have a great week, and thank you so much, Dave, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Derek.